Hey there, Wendy here with Jazzydoodledesigns, and if you're new to my channel, welcome, and if you're coming back, I appreciate you. For those of you that have been on my channel, you got the opportunity to vote on which book you would like to see, what pencils you want me to use, and what medium you want me to use for, say, in the background or in addition to pencils. Y'all chose Daydreams by Hannah Karlzon, Polychromos pencils, and Inktense pencils. I chose this little squirrel to be our picture today. And the things that you can learn, at least how I do them, is the gold filigree frame, the little squirrel as far as like how I do his fur, a modified bokeh background, and I'm going to attempt to make this gemstone glow. So as you all know, the rest of this video will be voiced over, but at this point, I don't know how it's going to turn out. And I haven't decided on the background. Everything that I've considered, I've rejected. So we'll see where we go from there. We'll learn together what I do. But anyway, I hope you join me. As always, all of my tutorials are just simply how I do them. I'm not a Chris Chang. I'm not flawless. I'm learning just like you guys are. And I have been doing some experimenting, and I think I found something I can live with. So let's dive in and take a look. Okay, so at this point you're probably going, why the heck is she starting with the tiniest detail on the page? So hear me out. So what I'm doing, first of all, let me explain what I'm doing. The light green, because I'm going to have the gemstone glow, I want the little leaves that are closest to the gemstone to be in this bright grass green color. Then on the opposite side, I'm going to do them in the darker green color. This, I can't see what it is. But anyway, the point of doing these prior to doing any other work is once I've laid down the wax and the pigment in these little tiny leaves, when I use my Inktense, it's going to act kind of like a resist. Now, if these were white and I was going to use like a black Inktense, this might not work, but I found it worked pretty well. And by doing the leaves and the flowers first, I could be more loosey-goosey when I was working with the Inktense, which, if y'all have been on my channel for a while, you know I am not the most patient person. I can be a little bit of a rusher, and you know, that's just kind of my personality and style, so to speak. So I am always looking for ways that I can make that work for me, and what I found is this worked pretty well. I didn't have to be as careful when I was applying the Inktense later. So once again, I'm going in with the light on the leaves closest to the gemstone, and then I'm going to come back in and I'm going to add a little bit of light to the dark, and I'm going to add a little dark, or I'm adding that a second layer, I should say, to the lighter leaves just on the very, like the closest to the stem, just for a little variance. Okay, so next up I'm doing the exact same thing on the flowers. So I am adding a little bit of a yellow just on the right hand side on the left flowers and the left hand side on the right flowers. Did that make any sense? I don't know if you're following me. On the inside part of the flower, the closest to the gemstone, I am adding this light chromium yellow. And then I'm going to go in on the right hand side with, let's see, this one is the lighter color, whatever that is, the middle pink thing. And I go in and I just fill in all the remaining flower, and then I'll go in on the outside edge, the part of the flower that's farthest from the gemstone, and I'm going to add in my magenta. The idea behind doing this is I want to give the illusion that the light is being cast onto these flowers. Now, maybe yellow wasn't the right color. Maybe a white would have been a little bit better here. Just simply because my gemstone really isn't glowing yellow. But I feel like yellow kind of depicts light. So that's what I'm going with, guys. I don't know if that makes sense. You may choose to do this a different way. You could certainly go in with any color for the flowers, any color for the gemstones. You could change all that and still follow kind of my lead, and then just change it to a color pattern that works for you. I do believe I go back and highlight the yellow with white Posca, but essentially that's what I'm doing at this point, and I'm going to leave you to it. Okay, so next up what I'm doing is I'm taking a Payne's Gray and I'm going along the shadowed edge. So if you think of the gemstone as being our light source, it's the part of the petal that's farthest away. So part of the flower that's farthest away. So I'm going in just on that very edge and adding a little bit of a shadow there with this Payne's Gray. Now you could have used a dark sepia, you could use black, you could use a little bit lighter gray. You could skip this step. I personally feel like it adds value. Literally, we're adding value, which value is the difference between the light and the dark, and you always want a little bit. The more contrast you have in value, the more engaging your picture is. I am also doing this to the leaves, and you may wonder, well, why didn't you just start with gray to begin with? I personally feel that the dark green is an important step, because even though I'm covering a lot of that dark green with the gray, it still reads green because that dark green is below it. If it had just simply been gray, I feel like it would have read gray. And the idea behind all of this is that in order to make glow work, the area around what is glowing needs to be dark. If it's not, if you have something glowing in daylight, you're not going to see it. So here I'm just adding a little bit of yellow and filling in those little, the little stamens or whatever that I missed at the top of the petals. Now next I am going around with that same Payne's Gray around all of these pearls in the nooks and crannies. And the reason I'm doing this prior to doing the pearls is because if I get a stray mark, if I put all the dark in, like I'm doing now, and then when I put my pearls in, any little stray mark is not going to show up as distinctly as if I had left these blank and done my pearls first. Then if I got white in those nooks and crannies where I'm now laying in the gray, it would make the gray lighter. Does that make sense? So much like we did those little leaves as a resist, that's kind of what I'm doing here. Okay, so this is how I color this gemstone. This could be done with any color schemes. You could use blues, you could use greens. I am just going in with my medium color of the 3, and I'm just adding in little slices and little facets of color, so to speak. Now I'm kind of concentrating my darker colors towards the outside edges because I want the center to be kind of white and yellow glowy type of thing. So once again, I chose this magenta kind of color, but you could do your gemstone in any color. And really, there's no rhyme or reason per se to where I'm putting these little slivers of color, because every gemstone is different. So I don't want you to feel like, oh, you have to copy me exactly. But the key is you want variance of color, and you want kind of more, like, you don't want circular blendy kind of color at this point. You want actual rectangles, pentagrams, octograms. Let's make up some words, Wendy. Why don't we? Okay, so just slices of color. And now here in the middle, I decided to add a little bit of this color as well. But as you can see, I'm not, or maybe you can't because my big fat hand's in the way, it's not quite as dark as what I did below. Okay, so next I'm going to go in with the magenta, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to put in little rectangles, little triangles, just little dark slices of color. And if you notice, I'm doing it sometimes over that lighter color, the middle purple pink that I put down, but I'm also laying in little segments of just straight magenta as well. So I'm doing both because I want to create a little bit of variance of color. Next up, we come in with that light magenta, and I'm just laying it ever so slightly, barely kissing the paper with this and just adding it in because I do want the gemstone to read pink. But I also want it to read glowing and white, if that makes sense at all. I don't want it to read opaque pink. Now I'll be using a white Prismacolor kind of throughout this video. I prefer white Prismacolor to the Polychromos white. But basically what I'm going to go in and just blend in those light, the light pink, and just kind of blur the edges of the faucet a little bit. You can tell I'm using Prismacolor because I'm having to flick away the crumbs. Oh, I still love Prismacolor though. But basically anywhere I haven't colored, I'm going in with the white, and then I'm also subtly blending. I don't want to eliminate, I don't want to create like a blendy effect, but I do want to soften the pink that I've laid down. And this is just a personal like feel that I'm going by. I encourage you to find a gemstone as a reference. Now I am using a Posca pen, and I'm going to go over all of the lines in this gemstone, inside and outside, so the outside edges as well. And I'm trying to cover it as completely as I can. You may or may not have to do a second layer depending on what you think. You can see the one I just laid down is going to need another layer, whereas some of these don't. So use your judgment. If it needs a second layer, let it dry. If you try and go in with your second layer while your first layer is still wet, you do run the risk of tearing the paper or kind of eliminating the first. I mean, you can do 2 lines, but you don't want to get crazy with it, and you don't want to go in while it's semi-wet. So if it's really wet, like you just laid the line in, you can usually do 2 coats like I just did, and it's fine. But what you don't want to do is go in to lines that you've already went over, and they're not quite dry, but they're not super wet either, because the Posca pen will remove the white and sometimes a little bit of the paper with it. So just be mindful of that. Now I felt like that little spot right there was just a little too dark, so I went ahead and just made it white. So here I'm going to create her ring, and I go in with the light magenta for the stone, and then I'm going to use green gold for the actual band. It is just too small to try and, fuss with multiple colors. And then I put a little bit darker. The first one was light magenta, and now I'm going in with the middle purple pink. So let's start in on our squirrel. And you're going to think, what in the heck? You're using lemon yellow? Bear with me. Keep with me. So what I'm doing is our background behind us is going to be a little bit glowy as well. So I want the side there and around his face and where I feel like that gem is kind of reflecting light, I am laying in this Inktense of lemon yellow. Now, if you prefer, you could use more of an orangey color here. I personally liked this combination, so I went with it because I did experiment on another piece of paper, but I liked this mustard yellow as my base layer. So what I'm using my Inktense for is a base layer for my Polychromos so that I don't have to do quite as many layers, because as you know, Polychromos takes a few layers. So once again, this is that lemon yellow. I'm going in and adding the lemon yellow on the top part of the arm where the light source would be reflecting, and on the little fingies and the forearms, because this is where I feel like the light would be reflecting. Now I'm back to the mustard, and I'm going in, and mustard to me is just kind of a light brown, and I'm just kind of going over, I'm even going over some of the yellow that I put in, but I'm going over the majority of this squirrel with this color. I didn't go into the inside, like the parts of the ears closest to the crown, because those are going to be a lot darker, and that little centerpiece in the forehead. So next up is the Inktense Saddle Brown. So I'm using the artist's lines here to determine where to put this darker color. And I'm just going over it lightly. The key to Inktense is I keep them a little bit on the duller side. I don't sharpen them like I do my normal colored pencils. And I'm going on the bottom edges of her arm. Next, I'm going to go in with a darker brown, and I'm going to go over a little more specifically in the artist's depictions of, wherever you see all the little dots, that kind of depicts a little bit more of a darker shade. Now, I didn't use it completely because I don't think the artist necessarily had glowing gemstones in mind, so I ignored some of the dark spots that she had depicted. But basically I'm going in, and now I'm going to see what I've done and we'll get an idea of what this looks like. Now, as you can see, when you want to start with your lightest tones and go in with your water brush into those, and then push into the darker tones, and then pull the darker tones into your lighter tones to kind of blend a little bit. When I go in to those darker colors, I do tap off my brush a little, and now I'm kind of blending it. So you can see I go in, and I'm really careful around these darker areas that I'm not pulling that into my lighter tones. So you just keep doing this, just activating the Inktense, going into the lighter and then into the darker. But as you can see here, now I can kind of freely go over those leaves and not worry so much about getting the color on them, or then having my leaves be some weird color in the end. So once again, going into the lighter part of her arm, and then down into the darker. And then once I get into the darkest part, I'm not dragging that back up into the very lightest part. See, tapping off right there when I went into that darker area. Now you'll get a feel for it because I do go into the darker area and then pull that out a little bit. Now at this point you're probably thinking, oh my god, this poor little squirrel is all jaundiced. But to me it comes together in the end, but I'm laying this down as a base. And I tend to I'm drawn more to warmer browns, and this yellow is going to make the browns that I use warmer. Okay, so here I want a dark, deep, rich tone in the ear. Now you could have used that natural brown. It doesn't necessarily have to be the sepia. I am using the sepia in lieu of black. In general, I try not to use too much black. Now next, I am using the Inktense once again as a base layer. So if you saw the final picture, you can see that I wanted that magenta to be coming from the bottom and forming a gradient towards yellow up at the top. Now to do this, I wanted that magenta at the bottom to be very dark and rich, and so by adding this Inktense dark mink, I get kind of this reddish gray as a base, and it will add a little bit of depth to that magenta that I put in. Once again, it's important that you're using these very lightly. You don't want to press too hard with Inktense. You just want to let the pencil kind of skim over the paper. And you see all the white that's kind of popping through. But you can see I'm not scared working around all those leaves. It's going to work out just fine. Now I didn't go as far up on the right as on the left by design. But then I go in and I activate this. And you just want this to blend. Don't fret too much. Like I do bring my brush up and try and blend it a little bit. But the idea is that these are base layers. They don't have to be perfect because we're going to use our polychromos over them. So once again, you can see how your color will push out a little bit, so you don't necessarily want your color out as far when you lay your color in as you want it, because you can move it with your water brush. So here I'm going in with my first like red violet or magenta color, and I'm using the Inktense for this and just kind of going in at the very base of this and just going up a little ways. And then I switch here. No, I didn't switch, I'm sorry. And I just keep going up with this color. But I'm not doing it as far out as I did the dark mink. I'm just doing more of the outside edge, because this is my darkest value as far as Inktense goes. So next up is the Persian red. And I'm going over the red violet. And then also pushing out into new territory as well. So I am kind of blending those a little bit. Now here I go in with not the lightest, but the second lightest color, which was that mango color, and I'm creating the little bokeh because I want to leave those little bubbles lighter. So I'm now working in my orange with this Inktense Wild Flame. Now I'm moving into the mango, and you can just see that I'm just going around my little bokeh balls. Now you can put as many or as little as you want. You don't have to put any. You could put more in. It really, the key is you want to put them in with a lighter color, because if you put them in with a darker color, you will see the ring, and we don't want to see the ring. Now here I put them in with a darker color because it's in my darker colors. And then you see the next one I did in red, and then as I move up I'm using more of that mango. And once again, this is kind of a personal choice here. So this is that thistle color that I'm blending down in with my darker Inktense. And you can see that in that bokeh ball on the right hand side there's color from that mint color that we put in, and that's okay, because I'm not looking for the little bokeh balls to be completely white. So as I move into my colors, this red, I am going over, I'm dipping in a little bit to my that thistle color because I want them to blend. And then I just keep moving through. Once again, I'm not being super careful, like I'm trying not to go too heavy-handed. I am using a fairly light hand and allowing that Inktense to just kind of glide, and then as I move into the next color I try and lighten it a little bit. So you can see I kind of left areas where I blend over the top of each other, and then other parts it is just that color. And then I go in with this mango up here at the top and in between the crown. See how it just looks like nothing right now? Inktense are just so amazing to me. So as I go in with my water brush, I want to prime it and make sure that it's a little damp. You don't want it drippy, but you need water on it to activate these. So I'm going in with my lightest tones first, and then going, you can see where I kind of skip that orange to the right, and I'm going down into this mango. Now I'm going into the wild flame, and you can see I pull it in a little bit, but just be mindful of that so you don't end up pulling too much of that color in and obliterating your light colors. You want a nice mix there. So you'll see that I'll tap off if I feel like I have too much color on my brush. But look how I can go over all those leaves, and they just kind of act as a wax resist. Once again, I'm not fretting about how well these blend together because I'm going to be going over them with colored pencil, and that's where I'm going to work on my blends. So see how I have the orange and then I tap off, because as I go into these reds I don't want to drag too much of that orange because I do want the red. And then once again when I go into this purple, I'm being careful about how far out I pull that purple. or red violet, or whatever you want to call it. Now at this point we're going to let this dry. I am going to go in and add just a hint of this fuchsia color, which is a lighter pink than I actually used in the gemstone, but I want to add that just as a little bit of that glowing effect, because I want that pink to kind of reflect into my squirrel. Now what I would encourage you to look at is it doesn't look like it's glowing much because my squirrel is so light. So I'm just starting to work on deepening up the values in the squirrel. Going back in with that saddle brown and adding in a little bit. Now, as I'm starting to work, even though I'm going to blend, because this is Inktense, I'm going to blend it with water, I still make all of my motions little flicking almost in the direction that the fur would grow. Because that way, if it doesn't blend completely well, it'll look like little flicks. So that's the goal, at least. And I want to deepen these values on the bottom half of her arm. So that's what I'm doing here. Careful not to get rid of all the yellow that I've put on the arm for the glow. But you can see I need to deepen up this squirrel. And I am using Inktense as my base layer. I am going to be using my Polychromos to add the oranger, squirrel colors and the actual fur. I'm not trying to depict fur, but I am being mindful. I think it's just a good habit to get into, to add in when you're working on an animal, to always have everything that you do with flicking motions like fur. Now once again, deepening the values in the shadow areas. So as you can tell from my bokeh, we've got that light coming in and it's reflecting on the tips of his ears. And in order to make that really stand out, we need to have those darker values. So that's what I'm doing here, is just creating a second layer of Inktense, making sure that it had dried prior to from our first layer. So you don't want, that's why we worked on the background, now we're back to the squirrel. And then once we do the squirrel, we'll go back to the background and we'll flip-flop to allow for a little bit of dry time. If you use a Copic marker, like a blender, or an alcohol blender, like a paintbrush and alcohol to activate these, which you can do, you don't have to wait for the dry time because the alcohol and the Copic blender dries almost instantly. So you can see here just adding in those little flicking motions, but I am going to blend this with water because this is Inktense. So now I'm going to activate it. Once again, working from the lighter areas and then moving into those deeper tones. Tapping off as I need. Now the whole point of this layer was to darken my squirrel. And you can really see the glow is starting to take more shape. I actually debated on doing one more layer of darker colors to the actual finished product that I show in this video. I really like how it turned out, but there's a part of me that says it would have looked even better if I took it that next step and went darker, but I was a little chicken. I was a little afraid of messing up what I had done, and too oftentimes I think that that is a problem in our art, is that we're afraid of messing up what we've done and we don't go that next level. And personally, I think I probably should have, but at this point I'm already editing and doing voiceover, so I'm not going to add to it at this point. I may in the future, I'm debating on having a segment where I go into some of my older videos and I improve upon what I've already done as a video. Let me know in the comments if you think that there's value in that, because I do feel like sometimes we stop too soon, and I can see it in my much older, some of my first colored pencil drawings. I definitely didn't go as many layers as I do now, and I think it shows. Now, this is a personal preference, so if you're someone that doesn't like to do shading, you're probably not watching this video, but you know, if you're someone that just wants to put one color on something, I am totally okay with that. Coloring should be fun, and it should be what you want to get out of it. Okay, so let's take a look at how to do these pearls. Now I am using a magenta color, but you could use any darker color, whatever the main color of your pearl you want it to be. And you're just going to do a little mini C, and then I just put a little dot of a light blue and a little dot of yellow. You could use a lavender here, any of the pastel colors. And then I use Prismacolor white because it's the most blendy. And I just basically kind of smear all those colors together. And then I go around the edge with whatever that dark color was. And you can see I kind of missed the line there. So I just kind of blend it all out again, and it works just fine. Then I'm going to add another little half C of my darker color. And then you want to add a little highlight, and I'm going to use a Posca pen, but you could use any sort of gel pen. So let's go ahead and we'll do another one. My Posca wasn't cooperating, but you just want to add a little highlight to the opposite side. So once again, we go in and we just add a little bit of a line of our darker color, a little bit of blue, little bit of yellow. Once again, you could use pink, you could use a lavender, you could use green. It really depends on what you want your pearl to look like. And then I just go in with that Prismacolor and just kind of blend it all out. And that gives it that kind of iridescent look in a pearl this small. I outline it with my darker color and then add that little C to give it a little bit, that gives the illusion that it's round. And then I wanted this one to be a little more blended, and so then I went ahead and just repeated that process, and you just kind of do this until it turns out the way you like. Now another way you can do it is you can add the white first. This is going to give you a lighter looking pearl. So then I add, same steps, C with the darker color, then you add your two little pastels, the yellow and the blue, and then I kind of smear them together again with my Prismacolor. But see how this one is just a little lighter all the way around? Go around the edge with the darker color and just kind of repeat the process until you have what looks good to you. I feel like this one adds a little less definition than I like. Phew, that was a lot of pearls. Alright, so now let's go ahead and finish our bokeh. So I'm going to go in with a dark magenta here, and I'm just adding my first layer. And I'm going in between the leaves and just kind of working my way up. Now I'm not pushing super hard here, but I'm not kissing the paper either. You know, I tend to be a little heavy-handed and a little impatient. Feel free to take put as many layers as you want into this. But I'm basically going over with the same colors, only now in Polychromos. Now as I move up, I try and lighten my strokes a little bit on, you know, where the next color would go, so that there's a little bit of an overlap, because these colors aren't perfectly a gradient, right? I mean, we're going from purple to yellow in 5 colors, and so you have to make sure that you have a little bit of an overlap. So that being said, I'm just trying to put down a smooth layer, try and blend it the best that I can with my colors. And I did try these colors on another piece of paper so that I knew that I could make a blend that I could live with, including the dark mink on the back or on the underside as the base. So you do want to experiment a little bit. Now, it's up to you. I'm kind of a planner that way. I don't really want to just hope that it works. I have a pretty good sense of color, so it's usually kind of a futile thing. Not futile, but it's not 100% necessary for me, but it is for my own peace of mind. So that's how I prefer to do things. I'm not telling you that you have to do it that way, but you know, all of my colors are swatched out, so I know what they're going to look like before I start, and then I also test them, because I want to see how they're going to work with each other, and how well are they going to blend, and can I get a smooth blend, and that kind of stuff. So you do you, but that's how I do it. Now here I go over the little bokehs with cream, because I want them to not be stark white. The one right by the squirrel itself, I left more white than the others. And then I'm going to repeat the process that I did on the left on the right. So I'll leave you to that. So before we get into the squirrel here, I will say I did go over the background with the Caran d'Ache, what is it called, Brightener pen, which is the blender pen that's just the solid core. I like that blender, and I really didn't want to use a liquid blender, you know, like Zested or something like that. I was okay with a little bit of texture in it, but I did want it a little bit smoother than you're seeing it here. So just know that I did that off camera at the end. Now here, because squirrels do have a little more red in them than my squirrel was having, he was looking pretty jaundiced. I'm going in with this sanguine, I think that's how they say it, but I'm going in and I'm adding this color basically all over, because you know, now I'm not going into the lightest of the lights, but I'm definitely going over the darker points as well as the midtones with this color, because I want her to have that orangish hue to her. So that's essentially what I'm doing here. Now once again, you could use an Inktense that's a little more orangey to begin with. But I feel like it really made it easier for me to do my glow effect with the base already being on the yellow side, so that I could just add this orange-ish color where I wanted it, right? And you can see with every color that I add to this squirrel and every darker shade that I put in the background, it makes the gem look more glowing. So I haven't really done anything with the gemstone. We will at the very end, we'll put in our little gleams. But at this point, I haven't really changed anything other than deepening the rest of the picture. So now I'm going in with Bistra, and at this point, so that last color, I was just doing little circles. At this point, everything that I'm going to do going forward on this is going to be fur-like, and I'm going to do little flicks in the direction that the fur would grow. And I will continue to do this for several different colors and just keep adding, and it will aid in the fur texture. Now, no one's going to look at my squirrel and go, wow, what a realistic squirrel you have. But it, to me, it really adds to the picture. So I'm going to leave you to it. Okay, so I'm not going to do a full tutorial on this gold filigree. I don't feel like it came out well enough for me to have this as a separate video. The how to color a pearl will be a very short video on my channel, and it'll be under a playlist called tutorials, and that's my goal in every color along that I do. I'm going to try and get at least one, if not more, tutorials on how to color something. And while I think it's a fair filigree, I mean, it reads gold, I don't really feel like it's quite good enough for its own little video. So just know I'm basically here going over all of this frame in the cream color, and I'm leaving little patches of white on purpose. Gold is reflective, and where you will get the reads of gold is when you use dark browns, bright yellows, or yellows, I should say. The color of yellow you use determines, okay, let me start over. The color of yellow you use in your gold is what is going to make the reader think it's either new gold or older gold, or even like a tarnished gold. Okay, so the brighter your gold, the newer it's going to look. The more contrast between your whites, your light colors, and your dark colors, the shinier it'll look. So in this case, I'm using cream, which is kind of a muted gold. I don't want a super shiny. To me, this filigree, to me, is kind of an aged, it's like old-fashioned, right? So I'm going to be using some oranges and some browns that are a little more toned down for a reason, because I want my gold to seem older. Now, I apologize. I didn't realize that the tippy tip of the frame and the very bottom of the frame aren't in camera. My apologies here. I thought the entire picture was in the frame, and it wasn't. Just do this part the same as you do the rest of the parts. Okay, next step is burnt umber. You want a darker brown. Basically what I'm doing is I'm going over where I feel like there would be shadows. So where things curl, I want it on the inside curves. Wherever the artist has laid a line, that tells me that there is a ridge there, and I can make that ridge pop out, or I can make it set in. So that's what I'm doing here. Okay, so I'm back to terracotta. Now you could use sanguine, would probably work here too, or any sort of mineral orange type of color will work good here. But basically, I'm just fleshing out a little bit of that yellow, richening it up a little bit. I'm not going over every single piece because I want there to be light spots, I want there to be white spots, I want there to be orangier spots, but I am kind of leaning towards along the shadowy areas near where the darker brown is. And then I come back in with my cream, filling it in as well, and just kind of blending as I go. So not hitting 100% of it, but hitting probably 90% of it, and just smoothing things out a little bit, because I'm going to use my white Posca pen to do my white highlights, so I don't necessarily have to leave the whites in the filigree. Looking at it now, I think it looked good with having the whites in it. So maybe going over all of it in cream, I don't know, maybe you could omit that step and then just put in your little pops of color where those white are. So this is another step that is potentially optional. I have mixed feelings about, I added this black into the darkest areas, and I have mixed thoughts about it. Part of me likes it and feels like it added. Another part of me feels like I might have been better suited to just go in with something like a Payne's Gray or a dark sepia. So toy around with that and see what you think. Now, definitely, if you look at the left side right now to the right side, you can see what that dark value does. It definitely adds a pop. So it's not that I'm debating. I'm debating my choice of pure black as opposed to a Payne's Gray or a dark sepia. So that being said, I'm going to leave you to it, and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, let's color gold crowns. Now this could be for any sort of gold object, but basically you go in and I added that light yellow color, and then we're going to do some stripes of other colors. So here is, I'm using Bistra as my brown, and I'm just adding those little stripes of color. Then I'm going to add some more bright yellow because I want this crown to look a little newer than our filigree. Now I'm going to go in with some dark umber, and I'm going to add a stripe of dark umber just right along where my bistra was, right? And up in the little pointy parts of the crown. And I'm even going to add some black because it is the contrast between the black and the bright yellow that adds the contrast. Now here with the black, I go along those edges, and then I'm putting in my jewels, adding a little bit more yellow to the crown in stripes. Now here I go over it with Naples yellow, and then a terracotta or a sanguine kind of color would work good here. And now as I add the white, look how this gold becomes shiny. Just that one little strip of white made all the difference in this gold. It went from dull to, it just completely looks shiny. Okay guys, we're nearing the end. Here I just use a Sharpie and I go over the black, and I'm going to touch up the right hand side of his nose, leaving that left hand side a little lighter. I'm going to do her nails and just the little dots. I tried to zoom in so you could see what I was doing there, but there's just little dots. Smoothing things out, adding little highlights. Once again, I kind of burnished the background with a blender. You could use a Prismacolor blender or a Lyra blender, even a blender pen. Now, I have been debating this whole time on the background, and quite honestly, I've decided I don't really want a background. Once again, I may come back at a later date and darken my squirrel up a little bit and possibly put in a background. I just could not decide on anything. I just felt like if I were to add a contrasting color, it would detract. If anything, I would add a very neutral background, such as a light gray, or even, I don't know, I just feel like anything that I do wouldn't look right. So I'm going to leave it the way it is. So the last things I'm going to do is come in with my Posca pen, and I am going to add a little circle and some flicks to add some sparkle or shine or whatever you want to call that, some little stars that indicate that this gemstone is shining. And it's really wherever you want. You should make the little flicks go in the same direction, but I didn't really. Adding a couple more highlights to the red in the crown and going over areas in the gold. So I'm going to leave you to that. As always, I thank you so much for joining me today. I am going to touch up a little bit on the top, and for a grandchild update, I will have a couple of pictures after the thank you for, or please subscribe, or what my thank you card at the end. As always, I will have a little grandchild update, and if I can find a cute picture of Ellie, I might pop that in there as well. But that way it's not interrupting your color along, and only the people that are interested have to look at it. So we'll see you on the next one.
Whoops.
Want to go see Odin? Yeah? Odin? You want to go see Odin? Let's go see Odes.